Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning back in. We've got a good topic for you today. You know, I'm sitting here, I woke up this morning, we had 44 degrees this morning up here in north central Wisconsin. We definitely are moving into the fall period. A lot of trees are starting to get color, and that transition from summer to fall has begun. You know, water temperatures here are still in the upper 60s, so it's not cooled off that much. But no matter where you're at in the country, over the next month, we are going to definitely see falling water temperatures. So one bait choice that a lot of people don't go to or don't choose during this period is a topwater. But I'm here to tell you guys that if you choose the right topwater bait, you can have some phenomenal days on the water during this transition from summer into the fall. Really, a topwater bait, in my opinion, works great until you hit about mid 50-degree water temperature. There's a lot of things that are happening during that period. There's a lot of bait fish that are starting to die off. The topwater is really a natural choice to make if you've got the right conditions. You know, and what I mean by conditions are a lot of times you want a good sunny day. If you're talking really cooler water temperatures, a good, flat, sunny, calm day can be ideal. But really, the nice thing with a topwater bait is during this transition, you have a lot of fish that are going from deep water, there's deep summer haunts, up shallow. So you always have some shallow fish throughout the year. But during this period, you have a lot more fish moving from deep water up to the bank to start feeding for their wintering period. And because of that, you know, when you take fish and move them into shallow water, what happens is they have less water over their heads, which makes a topwater a better bait choice. You know, if I'm fishing in 20 feet of water, a topwater bait's usually not the right choice. But because a lot of fish at this time of year are moving shallow and moving up into, you know, less than 6 feet of water, a topwater bait is a great choice. But not all topwater baits work great. In my opinion, there's definitely a handful that I choose. This is really a time of year when I don't stray much from these 5 baits that I'm going to show you. You know, during the summer, I feel like you could choose any sort of topwater bait, and you're going to be able to make it work in whatever conditions you're fishing. But at this time of year, it's really more about covering water. You know, you're going to be looking for bait fish. So if you've got some pockets or bays or creek arms that have more bait fish, you're going to be looking for that. You're also going to be targeting more of points, you know, whether they're primary points or secondary points, and just covering some of the bank transitions between points can be really good. But because you're covering a lot of water, you don't want to necessarily slow down with, say, a popper, right? That's something you can still get bit on a popper in the fall, but you're not going to cover enough water to maximize the number of bites that you're going to get in an outing. So because of that, I want baits that I can usually retrieve quickly and cover a lot of water. So these baits, I'll give you a little bit of specific times when I like to use them, but they all are going to work for the most part throughout the entire fall transition. So the first bait is a buzz bait. You know, this is a Dirty Jig Scott Canterbury Pro buzz bait. This is the one that I like to use because it allows you to thread whatever your favorite soft plastic is up on the back. Whether you're throwing a frog bait or a creature bait, I like to put a plastic trailer on versus throwing a skirted buzz bait. But the key with a buzz bait is you can cover so much water with a buzz bait. You just wing it. It's pretty much straight retrieve it. You might want to put a little, alter your retrieve just a little bit to create a little change that might create that might generate strikes through that erratic action. But for the most part, you're covering a ton of water. And a buzz bait is probably one of the 2 best baits you can throw in the fall. The other bait, very similar to a buzz bait, is a Chopo. You know, this is a Berkley Chopo. A Chopo is really similar to a buzzbait because you're throwing it out, straight retrieving it back in for the most part, and covering a ton of water. You know, between these two baits, when there are fall tournaments, I feel like these two baits outshine all other topwaters. So these are going to be the first two baits that I choose during a fall period. Now there's a couple of these other baits are a little bit different than that, but those are the two primary baits that I'll choose. The next bait is a walking bait. This is a Berkley J-Walker, just a great walking bait. Nothing special in terms of a spook style bait. But again, this goes back to being able to cover a lot of water. You can keep it moving. You can stop it if you're coming up to some prime pieces of target. But it's a really good bait if you do have a pocket or a cove that's got a lot of bait in it, because in those instances you will have more fish off the bank and potentially schooling, and that's when a walking bait can be a really, really good bait. The J-Walker is a great walking bait. Again, it's just one of those baits. I'm going to have one, if I'm going out and I'm throwing topwaters in the fall, I'm going to have one of the first two baits to cover water. And then if I've got schooling fish, this is going to be the other bait that I'm going to be throwing. So then that moves me into the next choice. It's a frog, guys. This is a bait that a lot of people don't normally go to in the fall, but I'll tell you, in the fall, if you're on a lake with good vegetation, you're going to have migrations of bass into those weed areas because they're going to hold heat, they're going to hold oxygen, and that's where a lot of those fish are going to move up to if you've got a lake that has a lot of good weed. If that's the case, a frog can be an absolute killer bait, even when water temperatures drop off substantially into the upper 50s. Don't be afraid to throw a frog. Those fish will come up and eat it. I do recommend a white color because normally that's the color of shad that they're feeding on. So a white colored frog works better for me this time of year than any other time of the year. So you want to have a frog. The other thing I'll point out with the frog is in a lot of lakes, especially up here in the north, you'll have a migration of fish that will move super shallow up into 2 foot of water. They're really trying to feed well, and that water's retaining heat. If you have a nice sunny, warm day, those fish will move up into those areas, and that's where you do have a lot of that shallow grass or a lot of that grass that's been torn up out on the main lake and pushed up against the bank, and those little mats will hold heat. So a frog is a must if you're fishing a body of water that has a good amount of grass in it. The last is a wake bait. This is a Berkley Wakebull, a phenomenal wake bait. A wake bait for me is more for the later part of fall. So once you've hit low 60s, getting into the 50s, a slow, steady retrieve with a wake bait can really generate some really good bites. Those fish will come up and hit this better than they will, say, a walking bait or other topwaters. In my experience, they'll come up and they'll just slurp it right off the surface. Usually it's not an explosive bite, but they will come up and eat it. So a wake style or wake bait is really the fifth type of topwater bait, but this generally is going to be geared towards later in the fall, you know, before, right at that end period of when I'm going to start putting down a topwater. So, you know, low 60s and down into the mid 50 range. Just a great bait. And this is not necessarily a bait where you got to have shad. This is a really good bait for up here in the North Country. When you've got bluegill, it just seems like you have fish that still want to come up and eat fish off the surface, and they're just antagonized by a super slow retrieve. So don't forget about your wake baits. They're definitely key. So those are the topwater baits I'm going to be throwing this fall. Guys, if there's other ones that I missed that you think we need to know about, throw it up in that comment section so that other people can learn from you guys as well. Otherwise, stay tuned for more tips and tricks that are coming out tomorrow. Thanks for watching, guys.